Well, so the demo for Heroes of Might and Magic Olden has been out for a while now, and I'm starting to feel confident enough to talk about it a little bit. Specifically, in this video, the dungeon creatures, my faction of choice. Spoiler alert. Now, I should note, yeah, this is only the demo, so there's a lot that is potentially subject to change. And obviously, even when the game comes out, things are subject to change. That's how patches work. But I wanted to talk about this anyways because I've always been a substantially huge fan of the Heroes of Might and Magic franchise, and I've never really done anything for it on this channel, so fuck it. This felt like as good an opportunity as any. I chose to do a tier list, which I don't normally do, because I found it's a little easier to kind of collect my thoughts and kind of, or maybe not collect, but orient my thoughts and really kind of focus on what I'm talking about. So the tier list just makes for a good format. That's what I'm looking for. A good format to help focus my thoughts and then let me talk about what I want to talk about without getting distracted. Anyway, let's get into this here. Or nope, I lied. Hold on. Let me talk about one other thing, because I always hate how when people get in tier lists, oftentimes they just jump right into it and they're just like, no, this is why. And like, I will admit it's a tier list. It's going to be opinionated by default because that's just the nature of the beast. But I do want to point out that I want to do my best to rate these units based on a couple of different factors specifically to help guide where they're going to go. I want to, first and foremost, is accessibility, and that is kind of twofold. So accessibility 1 would be just how affordable they are in terms of like their dwellings and any prerequisites they need to get to their dwelling. Accessibility 2 refers to just how likely are you to find them on the map. Are there objectives on the map that if you beat them, you can acquire the unit type of a thing? That helps. Obviously, low-level dwellings typically are a little easier to find than high-level creature dwellings, but stuff like that will help impact accessibility. I also want to talk about like how well the creatures work as kind of your power stack. Creatures that are like really that I'm saying that wrong. Let me rephrase it. But creatures that kind of form the backbone of your army and that you just want a huge stack of and become unstoppable with them. That also plays a big factor in how high they rank. Sorry, I tried to list them off. Where's my other list? There it is. And I also was comparing them to how I should note this here. I was going to say compare them to other creatures, but I'm going to specify because I worded that in my shorthand too poorly. I don't want to rate them directly compared to other dungeon units because obviously the troglodyte, it being the weakest dungeon unit, would be F tier for being the weakest dungeon unit, and the dragon for being the strongest dungeon unit would be in the S tier. That's not quite how they're being rated. I'm going to try and rate them against other tier 1s and tier 2 creatures so that like where they compare relative to others of similar-esque power. That also, I think, it will help make sure that they stay in more or less acceptable categories and so that I don't have huge disagreements. Obviously, again, disagreements are a thing. I also want to rate them based on like how useful are they just to have, whether you're playing in the dungeon or if you find them in a mercenary camp or if you get them to join you through diplomacy. Do you even care type of a thing? Like, are they good enough that you put money into them to mix into your army and take that morale hit to have them? Are they just that good? And then, of course, bias. As I talked about, bias is going to be a thing. But I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to try and keep bias to a minimum. We'll see. So now, with that more or less out of the way, let's get into the actual tier list here. And we're just going to go tier 1 to tier 7, starting with the lowly troglodyte. Troglodytes suck. They're really bad. They are they're just they're not as good as other tier 1 units you could potentially get. Their damage is acceptable for a tier 1. Like they don't have like no damage at all, but their HP is low. Their speed is 3, which is it's low, but for a tier 1 it's kind of closer to standard. I think most tier 1s are 4 speed. I wish I had kept the other pages open, closed most of them. But I think most of the tier 1s have a speed of 3 to 4. So having 3 doesn't mean that you're like bad, but it means you're on the low end of the 2 potential speeds. Initiative of 4 is kind of that's a little on the bad side. There are a lot of creatures that are going to act first, and not just against the tier 1s, but like in some of the early game fights where you're going to be facing tier 1 and tier 2 units, tier 3 units maybe in some cases in the early game, as you go like the first week when you're fighting some of the early battles. Initiative 4 is going to you're going to be acting really slow. They do have the Viscous Spit as their fighting style, which gives them a long reach attack, 50% reduced damage from their basic attack, but it does mean that they can make an attack at an additional range. So in that regard, I want to talk about this right now. So long reach creatures in general, or in the case of the Troglodyte who gains a long reach attack, if you so choose, there is an innate advantage to that. First and foremost, you don't take a retaliation attack, which is pretty nice, usually. And I'll explain that caveat later. But usually, avoiding a retaliation attack, good thing. But more importantly, it means that creatures like the Troglodyte with lower speed, they kind of, sort of, if you squint and turn your head, they kind of have a speed of 4, you could argue, just because the extra range they have on their attack. It's not quite the same. You'd much rather have a speed of 4, but you can kind of manipulate the movement a little bit to help kind of feel, so to speak, that you got a range of speed of 4. The problem with the Troglodyte's Viscous Spit, and kind of what I was hinting at there before, is, well, avoiding the opportunity attacks, avoiding the retaliation attacks is generally good. That's kind of one of the things the Troglodyte does best for the dungeon specifically, as well as just Troglodytes in general for any army, is after you kind of wait and the enemy walks into range, you can have the Troglodyte walk up and poke something, take the retaliation attack, so that your bigger, more important unit can come in and attack without taking the retaliation attack. So, to me anyways, the Viscous Spit is kind of if nothing else is going to be attacking that unit and the Troglodyte can't reach it, like the Viscous Spit is kind of like the, I guess, like if there's nothing else more valuable the Troglodyte can be doing, then I'll go for the Spit. It's a nice touch, but it doesn't really save the Troglodyte. It's still just kind of really bad, unfortunately. And as such, gets implanted firmly in F tier. He's useful to the dungeon units, or to the dungeon castle. Like, again, the fact that you can kind of wait out the enemy, let them come to you, use the Troglodyte to bait the retaliation attack. There's a useful feature of the Troglodyte, but it's about its only useful feature. So I just don't see it being any higher. Next up. Next up, we're still on the Troglodytes, just we're going to do the upgrades here. So the Infernal Troglodyte. I kind of want to talk about the Infernal Troglodyte and Toxic Troglodyte together, actually, which is kind of fair because you can only use one of them, so you have to choose which one you want. But it'll make more sense as we get into this here. So basically, the Infernal Troglodyte takes all of the base stats of the Troglodyte and just pumps them up by 1, with the exception of Initiative, which it pumps up by 2. Or is it? Defense goes up by 2 as well. Yeah, okay, sorry. Defense goes up by 2 as well. So defense and initiative go up by 2. Attack and speed go up by 1. So basically it just does everything the other Troglodyte, the base Troglodyte does, but a little bit better. It's 8 HP still, so yeah, the 5 defense is nice, but it's not like it got like superbly more tanky. It just got reasonably more tanky. The big trait that the Infernal Troglodyte got is the Toxic Spear, which is whenever it makes an attack with its spear in melee range, the enemy that receives the attack takes 25% more damage from all sources for the rest of that round, which is pretty cool. This also kind of synergizes with what I was talking about before, where Troglodytes work really well at just eating opportunity attacks. Because now you can walk in, poke the enemy so it takes more damage. The Troglodyte takes the opportunity attack, then your big guy hitter comes in and does even more damage. Yeah, like that. Yeah, the Infernal Troglodyte is basically everything the base Troglodyte was, but just a better version of it. Most importantly, it got the speed of 4, so that's very important. Having that speed of 4 in the earlier portions of the game, the first week especially, really nice because a lot of other things tend to have a right around that speed of 4. And it does give the Viscous Spit the equivalent of kind of sort of having a speed of 5, which is pretty good. It means that there are instances where the Troglodyte can wait, let the enemy move, and then reach them when the enemy wouldn't otherwise be able to reach the Troglodyte type of. There's some cheeky things you can do with it. It's pretty nice. The thing I want to talk about before I start ranking these is the Toxic Troglodyte, because it's kind of like the inverse of the Infernal Troglodyte. It's got a 5 attack and 3 defense instead of the 5 defense, 3 attack. Still has the 8 HP. Does a little bit more damage. The damage went from 1 to 3 to 1 to 4, which technically only increased the range. It didn't necessarily increase the damage. It just has the potential now to deal more damage. Its initiative only went up by 1 to 5, so the 6 is already kind of still lowish, but among early game units, 6 is all right. It'll make you faster than some other tier 1s, maybe some tier 2s type of thing, but 5 is, you're not really going to be faster than a whole lot, which is probably fine, but except here's the big thing. So the Toxic Troglodyte still retains the speed of 3 that the base Troglodyte had. So this Toxic Troglodyte, with its 5 attack and its bonus to its maximum damage, and minor, I think it's actually, is it minor? I don't think it's really much. Yeah, defense didn't actually change, despite what this website I'm using implies. Its defense is still 3, so it literally only got more offensive, except for but its speed of 3 means that it doesn't really get to do anything more than the normal Troglodyte does by default. So it can't really utilize that extra attack as well as it would like to anyways. It does have Alert 1, which means it can counterattack an additional time, which is kind of cool. It's got Toxic Blood, which is whenever it's damaged, all enemies adjacent, not just the one that damaged the Troglodyte, will take 25% additional damage until the end of combat, which is, again, really cool. It is combat instead of round this time, so there's some cheeky stuff you could do by getting your Toxic Troglodyte somehow get it surrounded by a couple of enemies and then cast a fireball centered on your Troglodyte. Like I said, there's some cheeky stuff you could do. It's not a bad unit. I think my big problem with these two is it feels like the alert and the stats should be swapped around. I feel like the Toxic Troglodyte speed of 3 and slower initiative make it want to be kind of the thing that hangs back and protects your shooters, whereas the Infernal Troglodyte, with its bonus speed and the slightly higher initiative than the Toxic Troglodyte, wants to be, especially in the spear, the Toxic Spear, because it wants to poke people with its spear. It wants to be the one to run in and start poking people. So it's like these stats and the abilities were kind of like switched at birth type of thing. I feel like, this is just me, again, you should give the Infernal Troglodyte the 5 attack, the 3 defense, and the 1 to 4 damage. I'd be fine if it had the 5 initiative as long as it kept the 4 speed. And then the Toxic Troglodyte can go ahead and have the 6 initiative of the 2, retain the 3 speed and the Toxic Blood, because it's going to be set. Because in this case, then the Toxic Troglodyte, which wants based on its stats in this case, would do better at staying back and defending your shooters, benefiting from the toxic blood when enemies attack or retaliate against it. Whereas the Infernal Troglodyte, if you gave it the Alert 1, when it wants to poke things with its Toxic Spear, so it has better chances to start spreading that Toxic Spear, all while having the extra speed to really make use of having a higher attack. Overall, I would say that the Infernal Troglodyte, just being an improvement on the normal Troglodyte, slots it into B tier. Or B tier, sorry, D tier. Whereas the Toxic Troglodyte is probably also in D tier, but I would say lower than the Infernal, just because it kind of feels like it doesn't know what it wants to do. As far as like whether you take any of these troglodytes at all, if you found them at a mercenary camp, you probably wouldn't, because most other tier 1s are more beneficial than the troglodytes are. And again, their biggest contributing factor is that they can eat a retaliation, and there are other creatures that can do it a little bit better. Not a lot better, but a little bit better than the troglodyte can. And, well, it's the biggest thing. I'm looking at D tier. I wonder if I do want to move all the troglodytes into F tier. Because while the Infernal Troglodyte and the Toxic Troglodyte are better than the Troglodyte, I just don't know if you'd bother spending the resources to upgrade the Warrens early in the game. Arcane Dust is generally a little bit on the rarer side earlier in the game, and sure, it's only 10 that you're spending on the Troglodyte, but if you don't have access to a lot of Arcane Dust, spending 10 on the Troglodytes means you're not going to have that 10 to spend on other better upgrades that you might need more. Do I move them? I hate to move them down. I think that I'm going to leave them in D tier for now, but I want that to be noted that I'm not sure if just because I don't think you'd really upgrade them. I don't know if they should go down. It's just really, like, outside of the Arcane Dust, it's really inexpensive to upgrade the Warren, so it's not like it's outside the realm of possibility to do so without breaking the bank. But Arcane Dust. I don't know if you'd spend 10 Arcane Dust early in the game on Troglodytes. I'll leave them in D tier. I'll leave them in D tier for now. I'm not sure I like it, though. Might have to put all the Troglodytes. We'll see. I have these guys in the wrong order. There we go. Yeah, the Infiltrators are the tier 2. And this is another interesting unit to talk about. At least I think so. Because they're kind of like the Harpies from Heroes of Might and Magic 3, in that they have the ability, anyways, in their fighting style to do the strike and return that the Harpies are known for. But especially early on, the level 1 infiltrators just don't really have a lot of movement. They have a speed of 4, which, like we were talking about before, is kind of right around the area where most tier 1, 2, and I'd have to double check, but I think some tier 3s are kind of sitting at the speed 4 still. So, like, they're not, like, fast, so they can't use their speed to outrange the opponent, which means that you can use your fighting style, but there's a good chance that the enemy you attacked, along with some of his buddies, depending on where the units are all positioned, are still going to be able to reach you when you teleport back. Meaning the fighting style is kind of meh. If you can utilize terrain, which depends entirely on the map, which is why I don't want to take the fighting style into account too terribly much when rating them, because you're not guaranteed to have a battlefield where you can utilize the terrain in such a way that makes the infiltrators, really good, where they can hide behind terrain to avoid other units. But yeah, I just don't see that. And the other thing is, like, here's the thing. So they've got 6 attack, which is pretty good. 3 to 5 damage is definitely nothing to shake a fist at. And maybe it's just me, but whether it's the fighting style or more specifically, just even the basic attack, it never feels like they hit quite hard enough. And when you take a retaliation attack, when you don't kill things and you don't deal quite, like they die really quickly. They are extremely squishy at 2 defense and 13 HP. They fold like a house of cards. Yeah, so they hit hard, but for some reason, and maybe it's just me, they just don't feel like they hit hard enough, and they die. They die really easily. And the enemy, or the AI especially, but in general, people tend to just murder these things in droves. And why wouldn't you? They're easy to kill, so it's easy to take that damage off the board. I don't hate these guys, but I can't. I would need a very good argument to put them above C tier. Someone would have to give me an argument in the comments that would convince me that they aren't just C tier. They're not bad, but they're just not good enough is my problem. Okay, so however, the Guile infiltrators. Now, what if you take the Harpy from Heroes 3 and you pumped it full of steroids? Sort of. Okay, it doesn't actually get like any stronger directly comparative to the normal infiltrator. Its attack and damage don't actually change, but it gets 2 very key changes when you upgrade this way. The first is its speed goes up by 2. 6 speed is now you got something to play around with. Now it's easier to do the hit and runs and be outside the range of not only the unit you potentially attacked, but his buddies as well. Which really good because it helped preserve these guys because they're very squishy, as we talked about. But more importantly is their staggering hits passive ability, which when they attack a target, even with their retaliation or any other means by which they can make an attack, they apply the Shackles ability, which prevents the enemy from counterattacking until the end of the round. So not only are they immune from counterattacks by making the attack first anyway, but all your follow-up attacks on that unit are also protected from counterattacking. These guys are like troglodytes, but so much better because you don't have to wait for the troglodytes to go and take the enemy attack. These guys can go in, hit the enemy, and they don't get to counterattack at all. You can just pile on the damage, and there's nothing they can do about it. I really like these guys. They still suffer from the I don't do quite enough damage, but I think that the staggering hits is just such an important improvement along with the 6 speed, giving you more to play around with in as far as like with the terrain on the potential battlefield and just avoiding like these guys. I think these guys are actually good enough to put in A tier. I think. Make your arguments for B tier, but I think they're good enough to be in A tier. Again, I think the only thing keeping them at S tier is just the fact that they just don't hit quite hard enough to really be like super good. That and the fact that you have to upgrade these guys in order to get them. You have to upgrade the dwelling, which I believe is it 15 or 20? Now I'm blanking. I don't have the answer right on me. I should have looked that up. It's either 15 or 20 arcane dust. I think it's 20 arcane dust. So that's, again, like we were talking about, said before, early in the game, arcane dust is not necessarily the easiest to come by without blowing up a bunch of your artifacts. So do you spend 20 to upgrade these guys? I don't think there's anything strictly speaking wrong with doing so. I think there's definitely situations in which this is a good idea, especially due to the fact that if you upgrade these guys early and you get them to especially if you go for the Guile upgrade, you can actually get a pretty decent stack. I would never personally power stack these guys, but they're really good on like side heroes, on secondary, tertiary type heroes, because they give you a little bit of range and that 6 speed. They can fight weaker enemies and avoid getting hacked and taking damage. And then they're just pretty good on like tertiary side, and they work relatively well on your main hero too as utility units, as a great replacement potentially for troglodytes. So you can use them to, you can get like stacks of like even one, but preferably maybe a little bit bigger stacks than that. But like, let's say like 2, maybe 3 stacks of like 10 to 15. And you can use them to just lock down the enemy's counterattacks and let your bigger, more important units start wailing on things. I think the utility alone is what keeps them in A tier, despite their good enough, but not quite as much as I would like damage. And I think it merits the 20 the arcane dust that you need to upgrade the dwelling. But the other thing is that if you don't upgrade these guys early, then the upgrade becomes substantially weaker because, again, the infiltrators are so squishy. You will lose potentially a lot of them within the first, let's say, 2 weeks or so. Probably the first week or two, we'll say, if you're not extremely careful with them. But if you upgrade them early, then a lot of that, like, there's, I'm going to keep them A tier. Make an argument for why the Guile Infiltrator should be B tier, which I think would basically come down to the Arcane Dust. Because I can see other factions, if you were to find like a mercenary camp and get some Guile Infiltrators, those would be really, really good. Very useful to have. Like, they're just very, very good units. I think the only thing keeping them on S tier is they're weak. They're not quite hitting hard enough. And if you have to actually upgrade them, their dwelling, it's a little expensive, but not necessarily unworth it. I'll leave them in A tier. The Bleak Infiltrators, in my opinion, not as good as the Guile. I don't really like using the Bleak Infiltrators. They're slower at 5 speed instead of 6. They do get better in niche. They have an initiative of 9. But they trade in that staggering hits for sharper blades, which is whenever they make an attack, they get 1 luck, which is kind of cool. Their weak spot passive means that their luck caps at 5 rather than 3. So that's kind of cool. The Veil of Shadows is nice. It's you can use 2 focus charges, and these guys can't be targeted until the end of round. There's a lot of value there. But I just don't see that being like super, like, first of all, there's a spell that does the same thing. So if you really need Veil of Shadows, you can just use the Veil of Shadows spell, which is not called Veil of Shadows, but I'm blanking on the name, so my bad. So if you really need the Veil of Shadows, instead of spending the 2 focus charges, you could potentially just cast the spell. Granted, that's using up your spell slot, so there's an argument to be made that spending the 2 focus charges is better. But the other thing is that they don't protect your other units. The Veil of Shadows means that you can't run up, hit the enemy's biggest, baddest unit, prevent them from counterattacking, and then have your big bad come in and start swinging for basically free. So I don't think the Bleak Infiltrators are bad. I don't think they're anywhere near as good as the Guile. I will put them in B tier because I think Veil of Shadows definitely has its merits. And I think picking these guys up on non-dungeon heroes is still some amount of value, a little bit. 9 initiative is pretty high. There are a lot of like high tier, like really powerful and fast units that are just barely above 9, or some that are just a little below 9. So like 9 is a very good initiative. So I'll let that carry them to B tier, but I don't know if I like that. That's another one that, feel free to convince me that I'm wrong in the comments. Still squishy. They take opportunity attacks unless you have Veil of Shadows on first. Yeah, I don't see them as anywhere near as good as the Guile, but I think they still have some utility. Some. Yes, the Dancers. Okay, so this is the first range unit for the dungeon. They're they're a little on the squishy side. They're not like in terms of compared to other tier 2 or tier 3 units, they're not the same level of squishiness as the infiltrator is to other tier 2 units, but they are definitely a little on the softer end for tier 3 units. A little bit. They do some pretty reasonable damage, not like super great, but it's pretty good. Nothing to knock. Initiative is fine at 5. The big selling point, I think, is their 1,000 cuts, which is every time they make an attack against an enemy, the enemy they attack loses 1 defense until the end of combat, and it stacks indefinitely. Combine this with their fighting style, Bouncing Glaives, which lets them attack 2 targets. They do 50% less damage to each target, but you can reduce 2 targets' defense by 1, and every time you attack those same targets with these dancers, you can continue to reduce it over and over and over. These are not super great units, but their utility is very, very good. Their initiative is kind of, again, lax, but if you are, especially this dungeon really likes kind of waiting if they can get away with it. And they're not bad. The dungeon tends to be pretty decent at playing the waiting game. They have some pretty high initiative units with some pretty good speed, generally speaking. So it's a little easier for them to play the waiting game with their melee units. Which means you can have your melee units wait, let your Onyx Dancers throw out some -1 armor, and then go in for some really big damage. Very good, like I said, very good utility unit. I would probably slot them, probably put them above even the, above, there we go, above even the Bleak Infiltrators. Again, they just very good utility. You don't need a lot of them. In fact, this is another one where I would probably split my stacks a little bit, because then you can get -2 armor or -3 armor, before you start throwing your big hitters in. Yeah, let's just, because I want to move on really quick here, because the other two, sadly, there's not a whole lot special to talk about the other 2 dancers, and a lot of it's going to be kind of recap. What do we got? The Jasper Dancer first. So the Jasper Dancer still has 1,000 cuts, because that's just the dancer's thing, but it also gains Demonic Blades, which is to say it has no melee penalty. It has Swift Strike, so when in melee, and it uses a melee attack, enemies don't counterattack. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think I've actually, I think I've done it once or twice, but I don't think I remember. I think the Swift Strike also works against enemies like Medusa who counterattack range attacks, so I think the Swift Strike should also mean you can attack range units without taking counterattack. They're all, again, I think it's just the Medusa. Don't quote me on that. It might be. I might be forgetting somewhere, but I think it's only the Medusa can counterattack at range. Which is kind of cool feature, but not great. Again, their big selling point is using Bouncing Glaives to stack 1,000 cuts. The speed of 5 is cool if you want to use them in melee. I don't know why you would. Similar to their predecessors, they're not super bulky, so it's kind of dangerous to put them there. Yeah, no counterattack, but it also leaves them exposed to enemies just deciding to attack them. I don't hate them. I would probably say, though, that they are worse than just the base one, because they don't actually add any substantial improvements over what the base one is, so it's not really worth the money, in my opinion. I didn't put them in C tier. I put them in C. Are they that? They're not that much worse. They're the same thing. They're the same thing, but with 5 speed, and they're just a kind of melee version. That really... Did I put them in C tier? I'm going to leave them in B tier. Well, no, I am going to move them down, because you have to spend the money on the amphitheater, which is already mildly expensive at 2 of each rare resource plus gold and wood and yada yada yada. So then you have to spend all that again plus arcane dust to turn your utility range unit into a better. Yeah, they're okay. Yeah, they're definitely C tier. I'm more convinced they're C tier. Because they perform all the same functions that they would have otherwise, and they're better at doing things that you don't want them to normally be doing anyway. So, yeah, C tier. However, Thankfully, the irate dancer also exists, which turns the 1,000 cuts from 1 defense per time they attack to 2 defense, stacking indefinitely again. And they got a better initiative, so they get to go more. They get to act before the enemy can try and close the distance. For the handful of enemies that can close the distance in 1 turn, yeah, their speed doesn't go up by more than 1 point. 1 point at all. 1 point. They just go 1 point of speed. But who cares? Because they're just better versions of the thing. I'm not going to put them higher than B tier, though. In fact, I would actually put them here. I think I'd put the normal ones first. Because while the 1,000 cuts 2 defense stack is great, and if you split your dancers, you can, quick 2, 4, 6, 8, yada, 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 it stacks up that much faster. It, again, requires you to upgrade the dwelling to get them, unless you can find them at a merc camp, but... And... It's the 1,000 cuts going up by 1 extra defense is good. The extra initiative is good, but it's not great. And I think personally there are better ways to spend your money. So I'll keep them in B tier because they're just better versions of the dancers, but they're not necessarily worth the dust and other resources you have to spend to get them. So I'll put them lower. I think that's fair. I think that's perfectly fair. Fight me if you don't like it. But now we get to talk a little bit. Okay, so we were talking earlier briefly about power stacks. And I was saying you probably don't necessarily power stack your Guile infiltrators. You definitely don't power stack your troglodytes. You're probably not going to want to power stack your dancers because they're better as to split your units to get the defense reduction. But the Minotaurs, now this is your power stack of choice in the game. This is insane. So Minotaurs have an HP stat of 50, which if you're not as familiar with the game, 50 is, I think, the second highest HP of all tier 4 units, and is in competition with tier 5 units. Like, there are a few tier 5 units who have less HP than the Minotaur. 12 attack, 12 defense is, I believe, outside of neutral tier 4s, the highest attack and defense of... Oh, no, I think there's a hive unit that has more attack, and I think there's a... I think it's a... I think it's the Sylvan has higher defense. So it doesn't have the highest attack and defense, but its combined attack and defense average out to be the highest. We'll say it that way. It does pretty fucking good damage. 12 to 16 damage is a really good damage range. It does a lot. Speed of 4. At tier 4, this is kind of the last kind of tier where that speed threshold is going to be important. Speed 4, especially for Minotaurs, which you can, I should know, this is also very important. So Minotaurs, their dwelling is relatively cheap. I think it's a little over 3,000 gold. A little under. I think it's a little over. I think it's a little over 3,000 gold. 5 wood and 10 ore. So there's no rare resources, and they're generally speaking going to be available from day 1, because most maps, at least the ones I've played, and this is again just the demo, but the maps I've played, you have access. You start the game with the building that the infiltrators are built out of, which is required. Why am I blanking on the name of that? Whatever the infiltrator's dwelling is called, you start with that one, which is the only prerequisite for the Minotaur. And even if you don't start with that, and I think there's 1 map, 2 map? I'm trying to remember now. I don't remember how many maps. I think it might be 1. I think it's just 1 map where you don't start with the infiltrator dwelling. It's a dirt cheap dwelling. I think it's like 5 wood, 5 ore, and like 1,000, 1,500 gold, something like that. It's pretty cheap. So getting to the Minotaurs is really, really easy, is the point. It's really easy. It's really cheap. Speed of 4 is really decent, especially early in the game, as we were talking about. 5 initiative is, okay, fine. That one's not great. But here is the creme de la creme. So Minotaurs have a minimum morale of 1. Their special ability, it's always changed over the years, but in this iteration, it's called Eager for Battle. So they will always have positive morale. The only way you can ever prevent a Minotaur from ever having the chance to roll an extra turn is to have, I forget what the artifact is called in this one, but back in the day it was called the Spirit of Oppression, which prevented anyone from even rolling morale, regardless of how high their morale was. But yeah, so Minotaurs always have a minimum of 1. They actually have 2 at base, which is pretty good. And every time they make an attack, they gain 1 morale. So they'll very quickly stack up to that 5 morale if you don't just get them to that 5 morale by yourself from outside sources. Yeah, these guys are your power stack of choice. That's what I'm trying to get at. 50 HP is insane. Their 12 attack and defense is ridiculous. 12 to 16 damage is great. The 4 speed is pretty decent. 5 initiative. The 5 initiative is about their only real drawback. That and they're really expensive and they don't come in large groups, but they're well worth power stacking. Especially because, and I was saving the best for last. So their fighting style is Grand Slam, or as I like to call it, the Dunk, where they basically become super dragons for 1 attack when they make this, and they get to hit not only the target that you're aiming at, but 2 hexes behind that target. So they can hit up to 3 potential targets, including your own, so some discretion is necessary. But yeah, the fact that you can hit 3 potential targets, yeah, you do 50% less damage. So there are instances, even when there's 2 units stacked up, that you don't want to do with a fighting style. But if you ever find 3 targets, it's always more efficient to hit 3 targets because you're doing 100%, you're doing 150% damage if you hit 3 targets. So it's always better if you can hit 3. If you can hit 2, you're still doing, your damage output is still equal to if you were hitting 1. It's just being split over 2. So sometimes that's better, sometimes it's worse. That's cool. They're just really good. Dunk is Minotaurs are fucking fantastic. I don't know how else to say it. Like, these guys are fucking great. If you're not dungeon, you love them. If you're dungeon, you absolutely love them. They are the backbone for dungeon. These guys are your, again, power stack of choice. I'm going to slot these guys right up, get out of the way, right up here in S tier, because these guys are the champions of the dungeon. Well, why aren't they in S tier, you might ask? Well, because remember what I was saying about how arcane dust is hard to come by early in the game and there are better upgrades you can use it for? Let me introduce you to the better upgrades you can use that early arcane dust for. The Minotaur Lord, which is what we're going to start with here. So, its defense stat increases by 3, its speed goes up by 1, its initiative up by 2. Still retains its 2 morale, still retains eagerness for battle, still gets the blood for blood where it gets 1 extra morale every time it makes an attack. Gains 2 other abilities, though. It gains a new passive called Parry, so it'll counterattack before the enemy gets to make an attack, which is really funny under certain hero builds. I'm not going to get too into hero builds, but if you do go for the hero build where your counterattack refreshes if you kill a stack, it can get really funny as you watch the enemy walk up, die, because they didn't get to attack first. Then the next enemy comes up, tries to attack the Minotaur, dies, and the next enemy comes up, tries to attack the Minotaur, dies. It's hilarious and really, really worth it. But regardless of whether you're doing cheesy builds like that, the counterattack before the enemy attack is huge because it means you get to do all your damage when you're at full strength, and then their attack is functionally a counterattack, and they're hitting on your now 15 defense. And again, Minotaurs are still very healthy. 50 health is ridiculous at level 4. These guys are just monsters. But if that wasn't enough, if that somehow wasn't enough, they also gain Unyielding Will, an activated ability that costs 2 focus charges, which allows them to fully ignore the attacker's attack value until the end of the round for all enemies that are attacking them. So yeah, if you're fighting a hero, a nice big might hero who might be wielding, say, like 12 attack on a unit that has, say, 12 attack, like another Minotaur, And then you just like unyielding will. Well, now they have 0 attack against your 15 defense, and you hit them first when they try to attack. These guys are insane. Very ridiculous. And again, because the Minotaur itself is so accessible, it means that their upgrades as a result are extremely accessible, with the only caveat being you need to have, I'm going to say 40. I don't think it's 40. Is it 40? 45. It's 40 or 45. I'm blanking again on the Arcane Dust cost. But if you're going to spend your Arcane Dust on an early tier unit, yeah, the Minotaur Dwelling is the best spot to spend it on. And similar to what I was saying before, other factions would kill to have Minotaur Lords, or Minotaurs in general, in their army. These things are monsters. Absolutely just beasts. And then the Vanguard, the final Minotaur, I get to orgasm over here. So it's sort of like the Troglodytes, where it kind of inverses the upgrades that the previous one had. So it has 15 attack and 12 defense to the other, that just swaps those 2 stats. Its attack stat goes up, or its damage stat goes up from 12 to 16 to 15 to 19, which is pretty cool. It does also get a speed upgrade to 5. Its initiative remains at 5. A little unfortunate, but not the end of the world. Nothing we're going to complain about. Keeps eager for battle, keeps blood for blood. Still has the Grand Slam, just like the other one did, something. The big difference between the Vanguard and the Lords are the stats, and then the adrenaline surge. The adrenaline surge that the Minotaur Vanguard gets here, which is whenever this unit triggers a morale boost, it gains 8 attack, 8 defense, and 2 speed until the end of that round. That is really, really, really cool. If you can keep these guys at their, I should also note they start at a base 3 morale as opposed to the base 2, so they get 1 extra bonus morale at base. Where was I going? Yes. So when these guys trigger their morale boost, the next time that next hit they make is, holy God. These guys really can do some serious damage. 8 attack, 8 defense, 2 speed. They just do so much. The biggest problem I have is that Adrenaline Surge is just not reliable. Even if you have 5 morale, you're not ever guaranteed a morale boost. There's no way to know, like in every other turn or every 2 turns, there's no way to know when you're going to get your damage spike. You just kind of get this damage spike. And when you get it, it's great. But you don't always have that damage spike. Which is why I'm going to rate the Vanguard behind the Lord, in my opinion. I still think it's a fantastic unit. I still think there's a lot of value to it, and if you're going to upgrade your units, you're not necessarily going to go wrong with the Vanguard. But I think the Lord's ability to counterattack first, and its massive defense, where it survives just everything, is more reliable than rolling the dice on the Adrenaline Surge. But like I said, it's really fun. It's really fun when you just hit an enemy, do a shitload of damage, and then it's like, hey, would you like to do that again, but more so? It's great. I love the Vanguards. I think the Lords are better, but I love the Vanguards. Okay. Medusa. I never know if it's how to do this, because Medusa is a name. I don't know how you pluralize a name. I think I know there's people who do like Medusae or Medusas. It still just feels wrong to me. It's a name. It's a proper noun. It'd be like calling, if someone was named John, it'd be like, it's John's. Like John. I guess if there's multiple Johns, it would be Johns, right? They're all Johns. So Medusas. I don't know. Medusas, Medusaes. I don't know. I never know how to do that pluralized. I'm just gonna keep calling them Medusas, and you guys can laugh at me in the comments if you don't like that. Where am I going with this one? I don't even know where to start, other than Personally, I think they're a pretty good unit. They're not the best tier 5 unit, but they are definitely up there in the rankings. They're definitely very high in the overall tier 5 rankings. 16 attack, 13 defense on 60 HP. It's not too shabby for a ranged unit. 10 to 18 damage it's a bit of a range, but it's not unusable. Speed of 2, but they're a shooter, so it's not that big a deal. It does kind of suck overall, but you're generally fine. If you're a shooter, you don't necessarily need a lot of speed. Initiative of 4, though, is... So their biggest benefit is they have sharpshooter. So sharpshooter is they can deal full damage at any range. They don't have the range penalties. That is truly what makes these units so valuable. They can shoot over walls. They can shoot across the entire battlefield. It doesn't matter. They're going to be hitting as if they were in close range. Very, very good. They're the biggest problem with Medusas is it's very expensive, like very expensive to get their dwelling. Not only do you need the amphitheater, which is 2 of all rare resources and change, but the stilled voices, I'm going to keep calling it the Chamber of Stilled Voices. I think they took the Chamber of away, but the Chamber of Stilled Voices is an additional 5 of all rare resources. So it's 7 of all rare resources. You are not always going to have access to 7 of all rare resources early on in the game. And I should note, for those of you who are wondering, what do you mean? How do you not have enough to do? I'm assuming we're playing on what used to be called impossible. I think is it deity now? Is it still impossible? I always forget what they call them, but whatever the highest difficulty is, where you start with 0 of all your resources. So you're not always going to have just 7 of all the rare resources in abundance. It's just like, oh look, like you might get 2 of them up to 7, but you're not necessarily going to get all 3 up to 7. I will say, if in the first week of the game you are able to get 7 of all the rare resources without crippling your economy, I should know, because obviously you can just build a marketplace and trade, but assuming you're not crippling your economy in order to get 7 of all the rare resources, if you can do that, these are probably one of the best power stacks Dungeon can have. But don't try too hard. If you try too hard, you're just going to put yourself behind. There is one advantage to Medusa in that there is a map objective. I believe it's called the Statuary Courtyard. Is it? I think it's Statuary Courtyard. Something like that. Statuary Gardens. Something to that effect. You fight a couple of Minotaur, or sometimes too many Minotaur, and a handful of troglodytes, and you get Medusa as your reward. So that's really nice. It's a great way for Dungeon, especially, to supplement any Medusas they do have. Unfortunately, it's not actually like a dwelling, so you can't just keep going back and getting them, but it does make them more accessible than other tier 5s. It's potentially a little bit costly, because again, Minotaurs aren't exactly pushovers. Troglodytes are, but yeah, it's really hard for me to rate them overall. I want to kind of keep them, I think more in the B tier range here. The dwelling is so expensive, but the fact that you can potentially find just a few of them lying around the map, and even just like a small group of, say, 7 of these things can do some pretty serious damage early in the game. Find them in a mercenary camp. They're really good. They're really good for other factions. I really want to put them in B tier, but I don't know if I'm trying too hard to convince myself not to. I had a pre-built here. Let's see. I did have him in B tier in the pre-built list. All right, fine. I'm gonna put him in B tier. I think that's fine. I didn't talk about their fighting style. I should probably talk about that briefly here, and their other active abilities. So their fighting style, Arrow Barrage, it lets you hit enemies in a fireball radius. The difference is that unlike Fireball, you can't just target at a blank space. You have to target an enemy, and it hits all adjacent enemies to that target. So it can be very good if the enemy is polite enough to group up like they are early in the game or early in the battle. Of course, your 4 initiative is going to help you hit them at that point, but if you can get the enemy to group up a little bit, you can do some pretty serious damage with Arrow Barrage. And then Slither Away is their other one. It costs 1 focus charge, and it lets them move their move speed, in this case 2, without ending their turn. So you can, slither away from an enemy who got into melee with you and start shooting again. It's a pretty good ability. It's another reason why I'm probably okay keeping them in B tier, because they have some really, really good abilities. They're just so damn expensive. Not necessarily in unit price. 440 is not cheap by any means, but it's not like they're not like super, super, super expensive. I'm gonna keep them in B tier. Otherwise, I'm gonna be sitting here all day trying to convince myself to put them in C tier. They might be. I'll take your arguments for why they should be in C tier, but I'll keep them in B tier for now. I will put them below, as we can see. I'll put them below the dancers, just because again they're so expensive. But goddamn, they are so worth it if you can get them. If you can get your Medusas early, they are an absolute potential power stack. Especially if you can find a dwelling on the map or one of those statuary gardens. If you can find a dwelling on the map and or the statuary gardens, and you can really power stack these and make a lot of. They just do so much damage. They're very good. The sculptors and the queens here are next. So the sculptors, they increase the initiative point by 1. They increase the speed by 2. They increase the damage range from 10 to 18 to 18 in general. Combine that with their sharpshooter, and you can. It's insane. The fact that the entire stack just deals 18 damage per unit in it is pretty good, regardless of where they're shooting. They also have duelists, so they have no melee penalty, which is pretty cool. They retain Slither Away, which I guess that means duelist is for your counterattack, I suppose. Still have Arrow Barrage. Petrification is the other important key thing they get. So when they perform a melee attack, they petrify the target until the end of the round. The petrified target takes double damage from normal attacks, although it's immune to magic damage, and it loses its turn. It does not affect dragons, embodiments, caveats. It does cost 2 focus charges. So I don't hate petrification, and I've actually used it to great effect on some occasions. I just don't love it either, because 5 initiative is really low, we're kind of talking about, which means chances are the enemy you're going to petrify acts before the Medusa does, probably. So you can petrify it, and then at the end of the round, the petrification wears off. So Medusa doesn't usually being the operative word, get to benefit from the petrified target taking double damage. Other units can. So if you're waiting with your Minotaurs, or you're waiting with like your infiltrators, or God forbid your dragons, they can come in and do some really serious damage. Like the sculptor definitely has some utility it can provide the team. The problem I have is that you don't really want to slither your Medusas into melee just to use petrification. And that means that you're going to be petrifying enemies that have closed the distance and locked down your Medusa. So you're not necessarily going to have backup to come in and benefit from that double damage. Yeah, like the dragons typically are really, high movement units. So if you have dragons, they might be able to still fly all the way back and benefit from the double damage. But most of the other dungeon units don't have like superb, cross the map in one turn. So if something is able to close the distance on the Medusa, you're not necessarily going to be able to benefit from the double damage and the petrification. You can, and there's ways around it, but I don't know. I think petrification has its utility, and I think there are definitely cases where petrification is great. I just don't think it's worth giving up what we're going to talk about next here with the Medusa Queens, where they have Marble Arrow is their special bonus, which is whenever they attack an enemy, they reduce that enemy's initiative by 2. They also have 1 more initiative than the other Medusas. Sure, they have 1 less speed, but again, you're probably not going to be moving around too much with the range unit, so that's probably okay. They don't have the 18 to 18 damage. Theirs is just 10 to 18 still, like the previous Medusa. Or the base, I should say, the base Medusa. But I think the Marble Arrow is definitely valuable. It should be noted that the Marble Arrow also applies on Arrow Barrage. So you can kind of, if the enemy is, if you're fortunate enough to have the enemy group up a little bit, you can drop a bunch of their initiative by 2, which is pretty cool. Overall, Medusa Queens. I think the Queens and the Sculptors, I think what I'm going to do is sort of similar to what I did with the Dancers. I'm going to put the Queens in the same tier, but lower than the base one, while the other one will go down a tier like that. And the reason they're lower, and the other one even drops a whole tier, is because, again, the Dwelling is super resource intensive. And not only do you have to pay for it once to get the Medusa, but you also have to pay another 5 of each rare resource, plus I think it's 60 arcane dust for them, I believe. I think it's 60. Sounds about right. I think it's 60 arcane dust. It's ridiculously expensive to upgrade your Medusa layer and get the Queens and the Sculptors. And while both the Queens and the Sculptors are good, just like the Medusa, and have merit, it's really, really hard to justify upgrading them. If you can do it, do it. I shouldn't say it's hard to justify. If you have the resources available to upgrade them, it's worth it. It's just, you're not going to have those resources available. And so for that reason, I'm going to put them lower than the base tier Medusa. And then because I think the Sculptor's utility doesn't merit upgrading to it versus the Queen specifically, I'm going to drop the Sculptor down a tier like I did there. So that's my reasoning. Feel free to fight me. Now, oh boy, we get to talk about the Hydra. I've been waiting for this one. Okay, so for those of you who are not aware, let me just explain to you the top 3 greatest mythological creatures ever created in ascending order from 3 to 1 is Phoenix, Hydra, and Dragons. In that order. All right, Dragons are the best, Hydras are a close second, and Phoenixes are really cool too. However, despite Hydras being the second coolest mythological creature in existence, they've never been super good in the HOM franchise. They've had their utility, and they've had their moments where their usefulness, generally as as garrison defenders. And Olden era, they kind of did the same thing, sort of. We'll explain this. I'll explain all these many different asterisks I keep throwing around here in a bit. Let's just first start by talking directly about the base level Hydra, and we'll get into the other caveats here. So, as usual, the Hydra is extremely bulky for its tier, with the exception of Heroes 3, where it's kind of just good bulk, but not great. But with other incarnations other than Heroes 3 Hydra, where its bulk was again average, maybe a little above average, probably a lot above average, but not like the best. But for its tier, the Hydra is really, really tanky. It's super, super bulky. And does pretty good damage, 25 to 28 in the range there. First of all, having a tight range is better. It means you have a little bit more consistency in your damage. They hit 3 enemies at a... sorry, they don't hit 3 enemies. They hit up to... Let me rephrase that correctly. They hit up to 3 enemies at a time, provided all 3 enemies are adjacent to each other. Despite what I would like, there has not yet been a way implemented into the game that allows you to have the Hydra target an empty hex in order to attack the 2 units adjacent to that empty hex. I hope to see that someday. I think that would be a very good addition to the game. I think that's a very powerful... I don't think it like breaks the Hydra, and there's a few other units that actually have kind of that same sort of attack mentality. I think there's value to allowing those units to benefit from targeting the empty hex in order to hit 2 on either side of it. But that's just me going off on a tangent, and I apologize. Let's get back into this one. So Swift Strike, enemies can't counterattack the Hydra. Pretty standard. I don't think the Hydras have ever, in Heroes of Magic history, ever been able to be counterattacked. There's Sweeping Strike, which we talked about. Yeah, those deal damage to the 2 hexes adjacent to the primary hex. And then Growing Teeth is the unit gains 1 attack stat whenever... or until the end of battle whenever it takes damage. That's pretty neat. One of the biggest things with Hydras is that they tend to have kind of lower-ish attack and damage stats, usually in other Heroes games, to compensate for the fact that they hit, at the outside of this game, everything that is adjacent to them. And so their damage is scaled in a way to help make it so that they're not like super good one-on-one. But if there's like 2 or 3 enemies, they can do some absurd damage to the point where they're topping the damage charts type of deal. This game kind of leans into that while also working around it. Again, the fact that you can only attack 3 hexes at a time. We'll talk about the Whirlwind Strike in just a second. On your basic attack, you're only hitting 3 targets at a time at most, and you can't focus the middle target or empty space to hit 2 targets. So the Growing Teeth really helps to make sure that they're going to continually output, good damage, even if they aren't able to maximize their targets. It's a good ability. Nothing wrong with it. But yeah, as for their fighting style, the Whirlwind Strike, that's where they actually do the usual Hydra thing where they hit all the hexes around them. And that's pretty cool. Unlike other Hydras, they do suffer a 50% damage penalty. I don't know if I said this on... I think I said on a few of them, but I should just say this overall now that we're close to the end. All of the dungeon units' fighting styles lose 50% of the damage output when you switch over from their basic attack to the secondary attack. So that's just how it works. Is you always lose 50% damage. But yeah, so the Hydras still have their hit everything around them. It's just they don't necessarily do as much damage. But the Hydra overall is it's a pretty decent unit minus one thing. They're still very slow. They have 3 speed. I was talking at the beginning of the video that 3 speed is considered kind of meh, even for a tier 1 unit. Now we're at a tier 6 unit with 3 speed. I will say that their initiative of 8 is really good. Not like super good, but it definitely means that if you can manage to pick up like a Hydra from like a Merc camp or something early in the game, it gives you pretty reliable access to the first turn, because it's going to take other tier 6s, tier 7s, maybe a tier 5 to actually compete with an initiative of 8. There's I think even on our list specifically here, I think the only thing with an initiative that competes with an 8 is the Guile Infiltrator has 9. So 8 initiative is quite high. Hydras act quite quickly in battle, even if they can't get into the battle very quickly. Let's see. Where would I put them? I'm thinking kind of... Oh, one thing I didn't talk about here. I should probably bring this up because it's kind of a little important. Hydra dwellings are extremely expensive. First of all, they're following along the same track that the Medusa and the Dancers come from. So you not only have to spend the 7 rare resources of each type on the amphitheater and the Chamber of Stilled Voices, you also then have to spend an additional 10 gems on the Chthonic. Am I pronouncing that right? Chthonic home, where you can recruit the Hydras. So they are the final unit in the Dancer Medusa kind of tier or build path. And that's a very expensive build path. And the Hydra's just not super good. Tanky. I put it all the way in D tier. I think I do. I think in general, regardless of even what faction you're a part of, I just don't think you're super happy to see Hydras. They have a nice initiative. They're bulky. They can do, like, there's some work that can be done, but they're generally garrison units like they usually tend to be in Heroes games. Far from useless, but nothing you're going to write home about. They're also a little on the expensive side. And by a little, I mean a lot. They're 1,200 a pop. They're just a little under double what a single Medusa is. And again, they come from a really, like, it's just so expensive to get to the Chthonic. Yeah, I'm going to keep them in D tier. That seems fair. I don't like it, but that's where I'm going to put them. As for their upgrades, so we'll talk here about the Chthonic Hydra. So retains Swift Strike, retains Sweeping Strike, retains Growing Teeth, retains Whirlwind Strike. Its bonus abilities are Poisonous Blood, which is whenever it's I'm misreading the hell out of this. Give me a second to collect my thoughts here. When this creature is damaged, causes all adjacent enemies to deal 25% less damage for 1 round. Does not affect undead dragons, embodiments, or constructs. So it's kind of like this reverse toxic blood from the troglodytes, whereas the troglodytes cause everything to take bonus damage. If you hit a Hydra, you now deal less damage. That's kind of cool in conjunction with the fact that the Chthonic Hydra has 150 HP, which is ludicrously high for a tier 6. Combine that with its 32 defense, and the fact that it regenerates back to full HP every round. If you can manage to find some Chthonic Hydras in a merc camp, or God forbid you are able to diplomatize even just 2 or 3 onto your side, even 1 technically is enough, but like I'm thinking like 2 is kind of like more what you like to get to diplomatize them. These guys can be thrown on a secondary hero and just clean sweep entire regions. Because basically, if the enemy can't kill 1 Hydra, they will never kill the stack ever. They can basically be thought of as having infinite HP at that point. If you, like I said, find 2 or 3 of these outside of actually building the dwelling, you can do some really serious work on a side hero. They can clean house with these things. Throw on some, not low level, well, there are low level spells, but throw on some like defensive buff spells. Even if you need to, maybe cast your own healing spell just in case. But god damn, these things, if you get them early in the game, they are absolute monsters because there's just so little that can do 100. There's so little enemy stacks, enemy groups, like neutral units that you're going to fight. There's so little of them that even when they combine all their attacks can do 150 damage to a single stack of these at 32 defense. Like it's ludicrous just how hard it is to take these guys down early in the game. And even as the game goes on, it's not easy either. Granted, when you have bigger stacks that you've built up over a week or 2, and tier 7 creatures, it becomes more feasible. High level spells obviously can do a little bit of work, but goddamn, these things are absolute tanks. complete and absolute tanks. Oh, I should also note, I've been going on about how much damage they do. So they're special, but they also have the special ability all heads on deck, which is whenever they perform a counterattack, they instead use Whirlwind Strike by default. So that's also pretty cool. It does mean that their counterattack is reduced by 50%, but if you somehow manage to get a couple enemies surrounding these guys, that 50% doesn't mean much when you're hitting 2, 3, God forbid, 4 or more enemies. If you can pull that off, it's not likely, but you know, if you can get a few, it's not a bad ability. It's not great either. It's probably not great because generally you probably just want to use a normal attack. Most of the time, the enemy isn't going to have multiple units surrounding you, but when they do, it feels really nice. And like I said, if you find these, like again, a stack of 2 of these on a secondary hero early in the game, then the enemy will be surrounding you with like 3 or 4 units trying desperately to kill you with minus 25% damage while you regen every turn. But unfortunately, they are not accessible at all. You have to pray you find them at a merc camp or somehow hit a hero with diplomacy that is strong enough to convince them to join you. And even the dungeon, again, they're just so ludicrously expensive. That said, I will give them C tier. I'll give them C tier because despite how hard it is to get the dwelling, despite how expensive it is, if you can afford the dwelling and if you can afford the upgrade, they are extremely valuable. So I will give them that. In fact, I'd probably put them up at the top of C tier. Get out of the way. I'll put it at the top of C tier like that, I think. If you can manage to get the upgrade, they are well worth the upgrade. That said, we have one more upgrade to talk about real quick, which is the Infernal Hydra, which doesn't have the same level of bulk as the one we were just talking about. It instead trades a lot of that bulk for more damage. And not just a little bit. The damage spike goes from 25 to 28 to 30 to 33. So 5 base damage, 5 to both min and max damage. So just the average damage goes up by 5 per Hydra in the stack. The defense goes up to 26 from 22, not quite as high as the 32 of the Chthonic Hydra, but still pretty decent. It does have 30 attack, which is rivaling, and actually it's not even rivaling, it actually is on par with several tier 7s have 30 attack. Yeah, that's ludicrously high attack stat. It has 5 speed, as opposed to 3, or the 4 of the Chthonic Hydra, and it has 10 initiative. Before we even get into the passive traits, I just have to say, I fucking love this Hydra. This is the Hydra I have always wanted. It's not like super fast. It does take it a turn or two to cross the map without haste assistance. But 10 initiative means that it is going to be acting early, so you can wait and let the enemy come to you, and then go right after them. 5 speed covers pretty close to half the map. I think it does cover half the map, actually. So 5 speed should get you pretty close to halfway across the map. So if the enemy if you wait out the enemy, they'll come in, and then you can come in and attack them. So like you can play around that a little bit. And again, they hit really hard. 30 attack again on par with tier 7 creatures, and 30 to 33, well, that damage range isn't quite on par with tier 7s. It still hits like a monster truck. Retains all the normal abilities of the base Hydra, but it gains on top of all that weakening venom, which is whenever it attacks, anything it hits deals 25% less damage for 2 rounds. Doesn't affect undead dragons or mine. The 2 Hydras are basically just like the troglodytes, but, tier 6 units. One that wants to be attacked to deal its effect, and one that wants to attack to apply its effect. All that said, goddamn, I love these things. They are absolutely fantastic. They don't fly, which is a little unfortunate, and they're not range, and they are very expensive to get to. But I'm going to put them right here, I think. You know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to put the Medusa there. I like that better. So I think I would rather, under most circumstances, not every circumstance, but I think under most circumstances, I would rather have a stack of Medusa than a stack of the Infernal Hydra, usually. But I think I would definitely take the Infernal Hydra over everything that's currently below it. Again, maybe not the Medusa Queens, because we're trying to also take into account the fact that if I had the opportunity to upgrade my Medusa, or if I had the opportunity to upgrade my Hydra, I would upgrade the Hydra first, is what I'm trying to imply with this. Because the Medusa Queens and Medusa Sculptors don't add enough to the Medusa, whereas the Infernal Hydra completely changes the Hydra. It becomes just this absolute monster of a unit. It becomes very, very valuable. So I'm gonna do like that. I think that's fair. Fight me if you don't like it. Okay, so now we can start down on the last 3 units, the last of our first tier list here. The Cave Dragon. Where would a Heroes game be without a Cave Dragon? It's probably what I should have saved to talk about the Black Dragon, but we'll deal with that one later. Dragons are one of the iconic units of Heroes, so it's not surprising that they've returned. The Cave Dragon, it's pretty good. 30 attack, so again, that, like I was saying, the Hydra in the tier before has the same attack value. And 27 defense is only 1 point of defense higher than the Infernal Hydra. However, it dwarfs it in HP. It's 275 HP on the dragon, with a 45 to 50 damage range, a speed of 7, and an initiative of 12. Yeah, this thing's pretty good. Very, very, very good. It comes with Magic Immunity 4, which makes it immune to spells tier 1 through 4, and unit abilities of this equivalent tier. It has Dragon Breath, which is the usual Heroes thing, where it attacks not only the primary target, but anything directly behind that target, including your own units. Discretion is advised. Its fighting style, Sulfurous Assault, despite the fact that sulfur is no longer a resource in this game. Everyone should have tier for the loss of sulfur. But yeah, Sulfurous Assault performs a cone attack, dealing 50% less damage to each target. So basically it just hits this sweeping arc for a shitload of damage. It's made all the better by the fact that it has a high initiative and a good speed. You do need tactics in order to get the Cave Dragon close enough to the enemy where it can actually fly in and drop a Sulfurous Assault while the enemy is still grouped up. But it also has the ability to, you can also just wait and hope the enemy moves in such a fashion that they stay grouped up, or you can just wait for the opportunity to present itself. However you want to do it. It's not a bad fighting style. It's actually a very useful fighting style. But I find myself more frequently just using basic attacks. Sulfurous Assault is good, but just not great. I'm not going to complain to have it, but I'm not going to praise it for having it either. However, what I will praise the dragon for having is its Inner Flame ability, 2 focus charges to use, and until the end of the next round, so you get it the round you cast it, and you get it for the round after you cast it, so it's 2 rounds. It creates a fire shield around the dragon that any enemy that attacks it in melee will take 50 magic damage per dragon in the stack. It's kind of like it's basically Olden Era's version of Fire Shield. In fact, the spell I think works very similarly to this. I think the spell has some new nuances to it because you could obviously cast that on a low level creature, but yeah, it's kind of the new Fire Shield. And if you thought Ifrits and Ifrit Sultans were disgusting with Fire Shield, you ain't seen nothing yet. The Cave Dragon's Inner Fire or Inner Flame can really just do some ludicrous damage and really stack up. It's really funny watching the enemy come in, take a swing, barely damage the dragon, and then die before the dragon even launches its counterattack. It's a pretty good ability. 2 focus charges is a little on the expensive side, but damn, it is so worth it. Cave dragons are pretty good in general. And I would say that regardless of what faction you are, if you can get your hands on a cave dragon or 2, you're going to be pretty happy. There is one problem going in back strictly to the dungeon, which is the dwelling and the build-up to the dwelling is both really good and really, 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 really bad. It requires the labyrinth. Fantastic. I want my minotaurs too. And now you're telling me I have to build my minotaurs to get my dragons? What's the downside? Well, the downside is that you need to also build the Mage Guild level 1 through 3. And that is going to cost you 5 of all the rare resources in total, plus I think it's like 6,000. No, I think it's 7,500 gold in total. I think it's 7,500 gold, 5 wood, 5 ore, and 5 of all the rare resources, I believe. Pretty sure it's close to that, if not, to get all 3, or to get the first 3 levels of the Mage Guild. And all of that just to get access to the Cave Palace, which will then require an additional 20 gems, plus I believe it's 17,500 gold. I think. Don't quote me on that one. I wish I should have brought up the list of the prices. I forgot. I'm pretty sure it's close to that number, though. Not that it should come as any surprise that a tier 7 dwelling is really expensive, but yeah, it's really expensive, and the build-up, similar to like the Medusa or the Hydra, is just really expensive even to get access to the ability to build the dwelling itself. It's totally worth it if you can get there, because the dragon is still just so powerful that it's totally worth the expense. Please don't break your bank or your economy in game trying to rush dragons. But if you manage to find a bunch of gems lying around, like a whole bunch, maybe you get like one of those gem deposits that give cash out every week, and you can get dragons, say, in week 2. Just saying, they make a pretty good stack if you can do that. They're pretty good. They are pretty good if you can get through all of the pressure. In fact, you know what? I'm going to be fair. I'll put them down a tier because they are it's very, very difficult to get them. But they are just so fucking good if you can. They are so good. Okay, so now we get to the iconic Black Dragon, the poster child of the Heroes of Might and Magic series. And the Black Dragon, and the Ashen Dragon, kind of like a lot of the different units, not just in Dungeon, but in this case specifically Dungeon, kind of opts for between Black and Ashen. Go for one gets to be an aggressive like fighter, and the other gets to be a bit more of a tank type of thing. And the Black Dragon is the tank variant with 350 HP and 33 defense. Still the wait. Oh yeah, okay, so its damage does go up from 45 to 50 to 60 to 65. It does get a hefty damage increase, though its attack value doesn't change at all. Its speed goes up by 1 to 8, and its initiative goes up by 3 to a whopping 15. I think, don't quote me on this one, I wish I hadn't closed my other tabs before I started this, but I think there's only like 2, maybe it's 3 tier 7 units that aren't neutral anyways, that have a higher initiative than the Black Dragon. And even the ones that do only have like by 1 point, which means it's not exactly hard to, depending on a bunch of other factors, to increase or decrease the enemy's initiative to the point where the Black Dragon is still faster than them. The same could be applied to that unit, so it's not really, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm just saying, if you're willing to initiative manipulate a battle, you can, it's not an unheard of thing for even the other creatures that can compete with a Black Dragon for initiative to have lower initiative if you're really trying for that. The new thing they get, or the new thing, things singular, is Fires of Dominion, which gives 1 morale and 1 luck to all friendly units while reducing the enemy's luck and morale by 1. It's kind of like mixing the old Angel with the Archdevil and the Ghost Dragon from Heroes 3. Except it also adds luck into the equation. But yeah, that's just... Yeah, getting +1 morale and luck while reducing enemy morale and luck by 1 to all your friendly units is really good. It also upgrades its magic immunity, I should note, from 4 to 5, so it's immune to everything. That I think covers the changes. Let's talk strictly about the unit here a little bit. So, yeah, the Fire's Dominion, great, but I'm not sure if it's enough, in my opinion. I think the stats of this thing are bonkers crazy, especially the initiative. And obviously the immunity is great. But I feel like, and this is just my opinion, but I feel like it needs just a little bit more than the Fires of Dominion. Because -1 to enemies' luck and morale is great, but most of the time you're going to be facing people whose luck and morale is, if not maxed out, beyond maxed out, so the -1 is not really going to have much of an effect on them. And chances are your luck and morale are going to be pretty close to maxed out as well. Especially if you're running an entire composition of dungeon units where you get the +1 morale for having all the same faction. But it's not bad. Super, super tanky. I will give it that. I'm going to put it up in S tier, but I still think just because the Minotaurs are more accessible, and again, kind of the backbone of the whole dungeon thing, that they're arguably better. The Black Dragon's still really good. I just don't know. The Black Dragon kind of earns S tier for being the Black Dragon, but like I said, I feel like it needs just a little tiny bit more. If that's not enough of a spoiler as to my opinion on the Ashen Dragon. So let's talk a little bit about the Ashen Dragon here, and maybe you'll understand kind of where I'm getting at here. So the Ashen Dragon's a little less healthy at 300 rather than 350 health. It does have 35 attack instead of 30, though it only has 27 defense instead of 33. It has the same damage range of 60 to 65. It has 2 more speed than the Black Dragon at 10, though it trades that for 2 less initiative at 13. A little bit harder to ensure that the Ashen Dragon's going to go first in combat. But, I mean, it hits like a goddamn freight train. It retains the magic, or it doesn't retain, but like the Black Dragon, it has magic immunity 5. It has the Dragon Breath. It has Dominating Presence. Now this, I'm actually going to come back to. Let me come back to Dominating Presence, because I'm talking about its active ability first. So it has a different active ability, in this case called Dragon Flight, which allows it to move to any hex and deal 100% of its basic attack damage to all adjacent units that it lands next to, and push them away if possible. It is considered a tier 5 ability, and it costs 2 focus charges. The Ashen Dragon's speed of 10 lets it maneuver the battlefield pretty efficiently, but Dragonflight does give it some cool AoE potential that you might be able to make use of it in the right circumstances. Again, having 2 focus charges at the beginning of the game, or at the beginning of combat, not always the easiest thing to do. So you're probably not going to very frequently get to just drop in on the enemy when they're nice and grouped up at the very beginning of the fight. But there will definitely be situations in which you'll want to use Dragonflight. Chances are, though, your 2 focus charges are going to be going into the inner fire, or the inner flame, that it retains from its base form. But Dragonflight, again, adds some unique utility, some little bit extra, kind of like what I was saying the Black Dragon needs. But in this case, the other thing is that dominating presence, which is where I wanted to focus a lot of my attention on here. So the dominating presence is that all adjacent enemies always deal minimum damage. Now, we said already, the Ashen Dragon kind of trades off survivability for offense. It has 5 less defense at 27 or 6 less defense. It has 6 less defense. Wait, is it 6? Yeah, it has 6 less defense than the Black Dragon, and it's 50 less HP. But when you curse everything adjacent to you, you kind of make up for a little bit of that. Even now, admittedly, even with dominating presence, the Ashen Dragon doesn't tank nearly as well as the Black Dragon. But it's not as big of a difference as you might suspect. Not only that, but this is also utility since it curses, quote unquote curses. Curse isn't a thing in this game, but curse in Heroes 3 sense. It curses all enemies that it's adjacent to. They don't have to be attacking the Ashen Dragon. If they're adjacent to the Ashen Dragon and attack something else you control that is within that unit's range, then they're still cursed when they're attacking that other unit. So, similar to the Black Dragon giving a utility buff in the morale and luck and the whole minus luck and minus morale, the Ashen Dragon also supports the team a little bit in that sense. It's not quite as impactful because it's not a global ability, but it's still impactful, and there's still a lot of stuff you can get away with. And more importantly, like I said, it makes the Ashen Dragon feel a lot bulkier than it otherwise would feel like if it didn't have that ability. Because the fact that all enemies deal the minimum amount of damage they're capable of. Most units in this game, I should note, tend to have damage ranges on average of about 5. There are some more that are more extreme. I think the Medusa we were talking about had 8 damage range. Others have tighter damage ranges. The lowly troglodyte had a 1 to 3, which is only a 2 difference. But what really is important is that this always deals minimum damage. Usually has the biggest impact on other tier 7s, which some of them, I think it's the Angel, has like a damage range of like 50 to 75. So now you're next to an Angel, it's always doing 50 damage. None of the Angels in that stack have even the slightest chance to do more than 50 damage per attack. So again, like I said, that dominating presence really, really makes the Ashen Dragon feel a lot bulkier than you would actually think it would be based on its stats alone. Despite not being the bulky one. But its offense is so much better, all the same, than the Black Dragon. And definitely S tier, because if you can afford the Cave Palace and if you can afford the upgrade, both the dragons are absolute monsters. And I think just I gotta keep the Minotaurs up top. They're more accessible. They're a better power stack. Well, they're not a better power stack. The dragons are a super good power stack, but the accessibility and affordability of the Minotaurs and the ability to just power stack them versus a dragon, I think that is how I'm going to make the tier list. I think that's more or less. Let me go over just to make sure. Minotaurs, yes, tier above, which is fair. I really like the way I put the Guile, the Infiltrators. I think that works really well. Infiltrators. Talked about the dance. I agree with the Medusa. I agree with. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this tier list. I don't think it's. I mean, obviously it's opinionated, so it'll never be truly perfect. But I think this is a pretty good tier list. I'd be happy to hear your objections in the comments. Give me reasons for why things should be higher or lower. Keep in mind that if you're going to make your comments, please try to keep your bias the best you can to a minimum. And also keep in mind that we are trying to play on the hardest difficulty. So this tier list would look a lot different if we were playing on, say, I don't know what, like easy or something. If this was easy, then the 2 dragons would be at the highest of S tier, because it's much, much, much easier to just get them in week 1 and start dominating the board. It's a lot harder to get dragons when you start with 0 of all resources. But yeah, I think this is pretty good. I would love to hear comments about, especially about why the the bleak. I especially love to hear why you guys think the bleak infiltrator should be higher or lower, because I have yet to be able to find a reason that he is comparable to the guile. And I'm honestly willing to put him probably down like here, maybe like just above the normal infiltrator. But I do think Veil is still a pretty decent ability, which is why I'm going to keep him up there. But yeah. So I'd love to hear specifically your opinions on the infiltrator. And probably the Minotaur. I really like to hear your guys' opinion on the Minotaur, because I truly think the Minotaur is probably just like, again, the backbone of the dungeon faction. Like, to me, the Minotaur is like the pinnacle figure. Like, you want your Minotaur stack supported by your dancers, and using troglodytes to burn enemies' counterattacks so that your Minotaurs don't take the damage. They can just walk in and just beam things. And the infiltrators are kind of like support units in that regard. They're just there to clean up anything the Minotaur couldn't finish. And if you can upgrade them to Guile, they can actually act sort of like troglodytes and just go and prevent the enemies from counterattacking. I'd also like to hear your opinions on the Hydra. Mostly because I really do think that it's hard for the base Hydra to be out of D tier. I think it's just, despite its advantages, I think it's just too slow and just way too expensive to build up to its dwelling and then build its dwelling on top of that. But I do think that if you can manage to upgrade the dwelling, I would argue that more often than not, you're going to want the Infernal. I do like these ones, though. These ones, like I said, these ones can be really dangerous. They're really dangerous if you're fighting them, especially. But like I said, if you can get even stack at 2 of them on a size hero, I think they're pretty crushing. All right, I will get out of here. I've been going on long enough. Although, in fairness, I feel like I could still talk about all these creatures a little bit more. So, count your lucky stars that I was trying to keep the video as short as possible while also gushing about my favorite units here. And then I'm going to see if I can't try or put together probably some more of these coming weeks / or so, because I really love so far what Heroes of Might and Magic Olden Era is. I think it is a fantastic successor to the franchise that does its own thing while still capturing what makes the Heroes of Might and Magic franchise so iconic. Anyway, that is this tier list. We will see you guys at some other point in the future.